this is me, Pastor Scott Boggs, again at the Potter's Church. You go to thepotterschurch.com to find out more about the ministry my wife and I oversee. I'm coming at you from my home office this Sunday, and it's every week. If you haven't seen one of these before, I always encourage you. If you're a coffee drinker, grab a cup of coffee, or maybe get a cup of tea, or water, or milk, or orange juice, whatever. Whatever suits your fancy, and I'm encouraging you to sit down with me for the next 15 to 20 minutes so we can discuss some scripturally sound teachings from the Bible. And as a Christian minister, my heart, I believe that almost everything, everything we do should be within the inspired scriptures. With that said, I'm not a legalistic Christian. I practice a lot of freedom of the Spirit in my life. I'm not one to lay down a whole bunch of rules and regulations and try to micromanage other people's lives. I believe your life should be lived between you and your own personal relationship with God. I don't preach, 100% abstinence from alcohol. Presbyterians serve the real wine and in communions, and some other non-denominational churches, won't. They preach no consumption of alcohol. I don't embrace any of that. I just don't believe that, people should be alcoholics. I got a lot of freedom, is I think what I'm trying to say. I'm married. I love my wife deeply and dearly. We just had our 14-year anniversary, which was amazing. Went out and sat by a stone fireplace at Starved Rock Lodge here in Utica, Illinois, and sat a whole day just reading to each other and discussing two different books that each one of us are reading, which is, for me, the kind of introvert way that I am, was just an amazing time, a beautiful day of rest, well needed. And I got three beautiful children: Joshua, my son, 13, my daughter, Natalie, 12, and my youngest guy, Caleb, is 9. All who are amazing and just excelling amazingly in their academics. Natalie's actually 2 grading quarters away, and she's got her hands clasped and praying. She's 2 grading quarters away from receiving the President's Award, which is just phenomenal. Gifted cluster kids who've been in high honors for years, succeeding years, and Josh, in a good kind of, almost like not in a dog eat dog world kind of like kill your competition way, but a little bit of the rivalry between siblings. He just brought home a high honors report card himself. Just probably not one to be outshone by his sister. And Caleb's doing awesome. They're amazing kids. They're gifted. They're talented. They're smart. They're kind. They're honest. I just wouldn't worry about you leaving anything around them because they're honest kids. They don't steal. They've been raised their whole life, being taught the red letter teachings of Jesus Christ. And with that said, we're not like my kids. We don't like wake our kids up and make them read the Bible every day all legalistically. It's nothing like that in our home. They play video games. They go ice skating and bowling and roller skating. They live their lives. They go to a public school and they go to public school dances. And they got friends. They got friends from different belief systems, who may not be practicing Christians, but they love them and are good to them, just as we as Christians should be good to everyone. And it's just fruit. It's amazing fruit. It's an amazing fruit. Our life, our blessing, our home, our family, and the principles that we live by. Trying to keep peace. We try to keep an atmosphere of peace. Sometimes, there's bickering and kids fight back and forth and stuff, but we always try to minister and iron those things out. And we live by a rule to not go to bed angry and let the sun go down while we're still harboring any resentment, bitterness, or unforgiveness in our heart. We practice the principle of God's mercies being new every morning in our home, and every day being a clean slate. We try to let yesterday's hang-ups be left in yesterday, and we wake up fresh. And as a Christian father, I've made it my goal to be a good Christian husband and a good Christian father. And we do things with our life that hopefully, Lord willingly, I believe are bearing the fruit of being followers of the way of Jesus. And with that said, one of my heart's desires, and something that I've been looking forward to teach and bring to you guys, is carrying that same kind of atmosphere and that same kind of family blessing the blessing, the right hand blessing of the Lord that I believe is on our home and on our family and on my marriage and on my relationship with our kids and in our ministry and in our work and on everything that we do and put our hands to. I want that to overflow into the ministry. As you guys know, we do Bible studies here every Wednesday night. I've been doing this for 10 years, where we focus on teaching a proper hermeneutic, the scriptures in their correct historical context, and which brings a lot of clarity to the Bible. And we also recently started doing these worship services with Pastor Janet and Frank Caro of the Nightlight Cafe in Berwyn. And we're doing this on Saturday nights. It's called Ignite. It's 7:30 every Saturday night, where we've been blessed to bring the worship and to lead the place in song and in worship. And Janet's gracious enough and kind enough to give me the pulpit to give messages. We kind of share that. Like this week we had Dale come out from the band As We Are, and he shared from his heart. The week before that, Janet shared, and she allows me to share. And one of the things that I'm excited about sharing right now is these things that are becoming more real and prevalent to me in the Bible concerning the Apostle Paul and his mentorship over two younger believers named Titus and Timothy. And so if you have a Bible and you got a chance or bookmark this for a more convenient time, it'd be great if you could go with me right now. We're going to go to Titus, and that's in the New Testament. I think the best way to find that is go to Hebrews, and then just backstep a little bit. And Titus is a small book, kind of easy to miss. If you go to Hebrews, and then go right before Hebrews, you're going to see Philemon, and then right before Philemon, you're going to see Titus. Hebrews being a bigger book to just kind of find and pinpoint. And pause this if you need to and come back. And I'm going to start here in Titus chapter 1, and starting in 1 verse 10. And here's what I want to share. Titus was a traveling buddy with the Apostle Paul. And the Apostle Paul was going all over the place into the Gentile regions, out of Jerusalem, out from the Jewish people and the Jewish temple, and where Matthew would have been and Peter would have been, still mingling with the Jewish people of the day under the law of Moses, giving their tithes to the temple and the priesthood, the Levitical priesthood of their day. Paul was going out into like no man's land and going out into the Gentile world, where there was pagan devil worshippers, Dionysus worshippers, worshippers of Zeus, Greek gods, and various, we could go on and on naming the different temples and the other gods that were being worshipped by other people. Well, Paul was going into those uncharted territories and literally starting churches. He would preach the gospel. People would hear the message of Jesus, the forgiveness of the Father, the heart of our Creator for man and for women and for all of His creation. And people would be converted and begin to listen as Paul was sharing the way of Jesus, which leads us back to the heart of God, our Creator, and our Father. And what he would do is he would raise up leadership in these small little house churches. And these house churches in his day, the day of the Apostle Paul and the early first century Christian church, usually didn't end up being any more than maybe 10 to 15 people. But nonetheless, it was important for them to raise up leaders who would be able to correctly indoctrinate and teach the red letter teachings of our Messiah, Jesus Christ. And these house churches had to be very careful, especially when you get back over toward Jerusalem, or when you were in regions, even pagan Gentile regions, where there was practicing Judaism, because they were very, the priesthood, the Pharisees, the religious leaders of the day, the temple workers, had just nailed this Jesus to a cross. He wasn't somebody they were endorsing. And yet the Christians who were meeting in these small house groups under heavy persecution having to hide their faith and having to hide the fact that they were hearing the gospel of Jesus and believing it and that it was resonating with them, the truths that he came to teach. They would literally have to go out in the streets and had a secret code. If you've ever seen the ichthus, I actually have an ichthus tattooed on my arm. It was that fish symbol. If I was a Christian and I'd heard the gospel of Jesus and I became a believer and I made Jesus my Lord, and I was walking down the street and I met you on the street and I wasn't sure if you were one of the opposing, oppressing, would stone me to death kind of Jewish, under the law of Moses followers, or if you were a Christian, I could pick up a stick and actually draw half that fish symbol in the sand. And if you recognized that, and you were a follower of Jesus, a fisher of men, you would complete that fish. I mean, you could come together and go, oh man, I just had a feeling about you. I thought you might have loved the Lord too. And this is how it was. They had these small little fellowships in different house groups. And Paul was raising up leadership in these houses, elders, and those who would rule well over those who would be congregating and meeting in these small house churches. Well, Titus was one of these leaders. Paul had left Titus in a region called Crete. Now, Crete had a reputation. There were a reputation in the day that was known for, and I thought this was interesting, inner city rivalry, which resonates with me being born and raised in Chicago. Inner city rivalry, yeah, that's totally like the south side of Chicago, and I could totally relate to that extremely well. Now, Crete had this, they also had a reputation of the people being arrogant, being kind of brutish, heavy drinking, kind of loud, brash, and even dishonest, people who would be dishonest for ill-gotten gain, possibly trying to sell you things that you don't really need and not really caring at all. And they kind of had this rough reputation. And even one of Crete's own prophets or poets, people who was a Cretan, had written about his own people being this way. And so here's Titus in a house church, being raised up to be an elder and to rule, and receiving this letter that wasn't as much like a personal letter from Paul to Titus, the Apostle Paul to Titus, but more almost like a letter authorizing him to be in leadership in Crete. Now, with that said, Titus chapter 1, starting chapter 1, verse 10. Here, listen to this here. It says, Paul writes to Titus and says, "For there are many rebellious people, mere talkers and deceivers, especially those of the circumcision group. They must be silenced, because they are ruining whole households by teaching these things that they ought not to teach. And they're doing it for the sake of dishonest gain. Even one of their own prophets has said, Cretans are always liars, evil brutes, and lazy gluttons. And this testimony is true. Therefore, rebuke them sharply, so that they will be sound in the faith." Now, something interesting to consider here is when he says, as Titus is beginning to teach Jesus here in Crete, that you got to be on guard of these of the circumcision group. Another term for that would be what we call the Judaizers. Now, the Judaizers would be the Jews who are still practicing the law and under the law of Moses. And as Christ is being preached, a new way, something different, grace, grace instead of law. They were constantly, Paul dealt with this in Crete with Titus, and he also dealt with this with Timothy in Ephesus. There were always these Judaizers, these people from the group of the circumcision who would come, and as Paul or Titus or Timothy was sharing the message of the Holy Spirit, of receiving the Spirit of God, who comes into our life, into our heart, and begins to recreate us, making us more new creatures in Christ and more loving, kind, honest, amazing human beings, filled with the love of God. They would always have these religious people, these Judaizers, and these people from the circumcision group coming in and saying, oh yeah, but no, you got to get circumcised like the rest of us Jews. Or you can't do this, you can't touch that. Or you can't eat this kind of meat. Or you can't drink this, you can't do that, you can't touch this. And trying to put their laws, the Moses laws, which was law and punishment, on top of these brand new babies who are receiving the Spirit, the forgiveness, and learning about the love and the mercy and the grace and the goodness of God for them. It was like a thorn in Paul's side. Always somebody rising up and trying to shut down the truths of Jesus that Paul was teaching everywhere he went, and trying to get people to go and become, for lack of a better word, more religious and follow the way of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the temple and the Levitical priesthood of the day. This was a continuous, constant battle and problem for the new converts in Jesus Christ. With that said, I want you to listen to this now. We're going to look now at Titus here, and this is Titus chapter 2. Just go ahead one more chapter and listen to this. This is really good. Starting in verse 1. Paul tells Titus, you, however, Titus, must teach what is appropriate to sound doctrine. Teach the older men to be temperate, worthy of respect, self-controlled, and sound in faith, in love and endurance. Love the word temperate. He's saying, Titus, teach the older men not to be 100 degrees, too overbearing, or like 0 degrees frigid and cold, but to be a cool like 74. Be temperate and sound like pillars, like rocks, strong and sound with self-control, sound and solid in their faith, in their love, and in their endurance, their commitment to these things, these teachings, and these impartations of Christ. Likewise, he says, teach the older women to be reverent in the way that they live, not to be slanderers or addicted to too much wine, but to teach what is good. I like how in Timothy, I believe it was, he says not to be busybodies and gossipers, going around from house to house spreading gossip about each other. Then the older women, they can urge the younger women to love their husbands and their children, to be self-controlled and pure, and to be busy at home, to be kind, and to be subject to their husbands, so that no one will malign the word of God. Similarly, he says, encourage the young men to be self-controlled in everything. Set them an example by doing what is good. He says, Titus, live your life sound and firm and strong in the faith and in love and in purity, that you'll be setting an example for the younger men. He says, Titus, in your teaching, show integrity, seriousness, and soundness of speech that cannot be condemned, so that those who oppose you may be ashamed because they have nothing bad to say about any of us. Now this was him dealing with Titus, dealing with the Cratians and Crete. Now listen to what Paul, who is also listed as Timothy as one of his true sons, and that Paul was mentoring over in Ephesus, raising up another younger apostle. He says to Timothy now in Ephesus, that was Titus in Crete, Timothy, don't let anybody look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in your speech, in your conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. That's 1 Timothy 4:12. One of my favorites to give to young men and youth. He says in 1 Timothy chapter 5, 1 and 2, do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as if he was your father. Treat younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, and younger women as sisters with absolute purity. This is 1 Timothy chapter 5, 1 through 2. That's the Apostle Paul's instructions to Timothy, one that he called one of his true sons in the faith. Where my heart is going with all of this is just the family atmosphere. I mean, there's nobody not covered in this. And I started this, I prerequisited all this with talking about just the blessing that is on my own marriage, that's on my own family, that's in my own home. And as a minister and an ambassador of the new covenant, the way of Jesus, straight back home to a reconciled relationship with our Father who art in heaven, I just want to overflow that into everybody that we do ministry with. You know, we need people to come and father the fatherless in our midst. We need older women to act like grandmas to the younger generation that may not have family. There's a great deal of brokenness in our society today. I mean, I myself, I come from, divorced mom and dad when I was 7 years old. I didn't have like a Christian household where a Christian dad took us to church and we learned the Bible together and sang worship songs. My parents divorced when I was 7. I had a stepmom, I had a stepbrother. I visited my dad on weekends, and I got a whole chapter in my book that deals with all that. I'm not going to talk about all that today. But, I come from brokenness. And I knew that as I grew in the Lord, that one of my highest heart's desires was to be a Christian father, to be a Christian husband, and to raise good, godly Christian children, and to have Jesus an everyday integral part of our life. I said earlier, we don't make our kids get up and read the Bible every day, but we live the Bible every day. And I believe that our lives show the fruit of that. And I don't think that we should hide that. I don't think we should hide how good and a healthy home can be. We shouldn't put our light under a bushel. But I believe that we should all be Christian families and homes. We should be like a city on a hill, shining like an example for others to see and to learn from. And I don't think, sometimes I feel like, well, I don't want to talk about how amazingly good it can be, because I don't want it to hurt or offend the brokenness in our society. But at the same time, I don't think that we need to come down to the brokenness, but as much as we need to set a vantage point or a bar for the brokenness to be risen up to. And I'm not saying all this to say that I haven't had arguments with my wife, or that we don't have issues like everybody else does, like that we're like, but I'm going to tell you, there's something about being a Christian family that treats each other like the same way that we should be treating each other in the church, like mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters, the family of God, in a pure way. I just want to overflow that. And I want others to experience that, not only in your homes, but in your work, in your own ministries, in your own endeavors, and in your own missions in life. And I really want that atmosphere to be cultivated and to be felt and experienced anytime you come and you worship, or you come to a Bible study, or you decide to join with us in the things that we're doing for our Lord Christ Jesus. We love you, man, and we love you in the love of the Lord and in the way that we're instructed and being taught and risen up by His Spirit to love you. And with that said, that's it for this evening. I'm Pastor Scott Boggs of the Potter's Church. Hope you learned something from this. And if you want to go to potterschurch.com, you can find out more. And obviously, if you're not doing anything on a Saturday night, man, whether you're single or got a whole family, a tribe, if you're like us and you got kids, bring the whole family out every Saturday night, man. 7:30, 7009 Ogden Avenue, Nightlight Cafe, beautiful place. It's the double doors right between a music shop and a thrift store called Simply Saved. We're going to be coming in there and just bringing worship and fellowshipping and praying and doing life together as a family. And I want you all to know that, you know, I'm in it for lifelong relationships. I have gotten the boot, you know, out of some churches, I ain't gonna lie, usually because of some controversial theological things that I either don't embrace or teach contrary to a lot of the religious establishment of the day. But it ain't me, you know, leaving. I get kicked out sometimes, but I'm always in the same place, man. I'm here. I'm going to be here 52 weeks a year, teaching the Bible on Wednesdays, and now us doing this beautiful, free, spirit-filled worship service in Berwyn on Saturday nights. And I ain't gone nowhere, and I'm here, and hopefully we could see some of you guys in the near and dear future. So, yeah, Saturday night, 7009 Ogden Avenue, the Nightlight Cafe. That's my wife and I, the Potter's Church, teaming up with Frank and Janet Carroll of the Nightlight Cafe. And believing for God to do just some awesome, amazing things here in Chicago. I believe God's heart right now is, I mean, God's heart is for all. But I believe there's something unique and amazing that He really wants to pour out and do here in the Chicagoland area. So that's it. Pastor Scott Boggs. Love you guys, and we'll see you soon.